the battlefield smelled of iron and regret. Captain Darius Thorne had grown accustomed to that scent over the 7 years he'd served in the Covenant Wars. It clung to his armor like a second skin, seeped into his dreams, became the taste at the back of his throat every morning when he woke. But tonight, standing in the aftermath of the Battle of Crimson Vale, something felt different. The air carried more than blood and burned ozone, it carried the weight of endings. Around him, the remains of what had once been a thriving border settlement lay in ruins. Fires still burned in scattered pockets, casting dancing shadows across broken walls and shattered weapons. The sky above churned with dark clouds, backlit by a moon so full and red it looked like a wound torn open in the heavens. His battalion, what remained of it, worked silently to gather the fallen, both human and vampire, treating the dead with equal reverence. That had been his command. That had always been his command. Darius stood at the edge of the main encampment, his powered armor humming softly with residual energy. The exosuit was a marvel of human engineering, a necessity in the war against the vampire covens. It amplified strength, provided tactical displays, could withstand strikes that would pulverize unprotected flesh. But it was heavy. Not just in weight, though the composite plating and neural interface systems added nearly 60 pounds to his frame, but in expectation. When you wore the armor of humanity's defenders, you carried more than metal. You carried hope. You carried the desperate belief that humanity could stand against immortal predators who'd haunted their kind since time immemorial. Captain. The voice came from behind him, young and uncertain. Lieutenant Sarah Chin, one of his squad leaders, approached with careful steps. Her own armor was scorched black along the left side, the paint bubbled and cracked from a plasma strike. She's arriving. Scouts report her convoy is 10 minutes out. Darius nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the distant tree line where darkness gathered like a physical thing. Thank you, Lieutenant. Ensure the men stand down. No aggressive postures. No weapons charged. Sir, is that wise? She's coming with her personal guard, and after what happened today, she's coming under a Parley banner. Darius turned to face Chin, and even through the fatigue that lined his features, his conviction showed clear. We honor that. We honor it because we're not them. Because we chose to be better. Chin hesitated, then saluted and departed. Darius knew she thought him naive. Most of his command did. In a war that had claimed billions, where entire continents had fallen to the vampire houses and their unholy alliances, mercy was considered a luxury humanity could no longer afford. But Darius had seen what happened when humans abandoned their principles to match the brutality of their enemies. He'd seen good people become monsters wearing a different skin. He'd sworn he would never let that happen to him. The convoy arrived exactly on schedule, 3 armored transports of obsidian and crimson, moving with the eerie silence characteristic of vampire technology. They didn't rumble across the broken ground. They glided, hovering inches above the earth, propelled by principles of levitation that human scientists still struggled to replicate. The vehicles formed a protective triangle in the designated neutral zone, and from the center transport she emerged. Lady Seraphine Valcroix, war bride of House Mordain, second daughter of the Eternal Court, blood general of the Northern Front. Even after 2 years of occasional encounters across negotiating tables and battlefield truces, Darius found himself struck by her presence. She stood perhaps 5'8", slender in the way that predators were slender, all lean muscle and coiled potential. Her skin was the pale white of marble, flawless and cold, the kind of pallor that came from centuries avoiding the sun. Silver-black hair fell past her shoulders in waves that caught the moonlight, and her eyes, those eyes that now fixed on him, glowed with an internal crimson luminescence that seemed to pierce through shadow and pretense alike. She wore armor that was equal parts warfare and ceremony. The breastplate was black steel etched with silver runes that marked her bloodline and battle honors. Pauldrons shaped like bat wings swept up from her shoulders, and a crimson cloak fell from them like spilled blood. But woven through the martial design were elements of something older. Lace at the collar, silk ribbons dyed deep red braided through the armor joints, and on her left hand, a ring that marked her as a war bride, one chosen not just for martial prowess but for diplomatic marriage alliances that were supposed to prevent conflicts like this. Her marriage to Lord Victor of House Thrain had been meant to unite 2 feuding vampire covens. Instead, it had brought both houses into the war against humanity. Behind her came her honor guard, 6 vampire warriors in full battle dress, their eyes glowing in the darkness, hands resting on weapons that hummed with barely restrained energy. But they maintained the protocols. They stayed at the perimeter while Seraphine advanced alone into the neutral ground. Darius walked forward to meet her, aware of how his armor's servos whined softly with each step, how clumsy and loud human technology seemed compared to the silent grace of vampire craft. They stopped 10 feet apart, 2 commanders in the ruins of a shared battlefield. Captain Thorne. Her voice was like cold silk, carrying an accent that came from a time when the language itself was different. You called for this parley. I have come. Lady Valcroix. He inclined his head, respect without subservience. I called for it because what happened today should never have happened. A civilian settlement, protected under the Geneva Concordat, was attacked by forces bearing your house's sigil. 47 non-combatants dead. 112 injured. This was a war crime by any standard, human or vampire. Seraphine's expression remained perfectly controlled, but something flickered in those crimson eyes. The forces in question were not acting under my command. They flew your colors. There are factions within my house who do not agree with my methods. She spoke carefully, each word chosen with precision. Lord Victor has been pressuring the Eternal Court to adopt more aggressive strategies. There are those who believe the old ways, the hunting, the terror, the absolute dominance should return. I do not command these zealots, Captain. I am simply the face they hide behind. Darius felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd suspected internal divisions in House Mordain, but hearing her confirm it opened new tactical considerations. It also complicated the careful balance of honor and pragmatism he'd been trying to maintain. Then your house is compromised. You can't guarantee compliance with the treaties. Can you? Her counter came swift as a blade. Can you guarantee that every human soldier follows your commands? That there are no units that have decided genocide is the only answer, who burn vampire civilians in their sanctuaries, who destroy centuries of cultural heritage in the name of survival? The barb struck home because it was true. Darius had spent as much time restraining his own forces as fighting the enemy. The Purge Brigades, human extremists who saw all vampires as monsters to be exterminated, had forced him into conflicts with his own command structure more than once. I don't claim perfection, he said quietly. I claim the attempt. I claim that we keep trying to be better than our worst impulses, even when it costs us. Seraphine studied him for a long moment, and in that silence, something shifted. The formal distance between them, commander to commander, human to vampire, mortal to immortal, seemed to thin just slightly. You really believe that, don't you? She sounded almost curious. After everything you've seen, after all the losses, you still believe in redemption. I believe in choice. Every day, every decision. We choose what we are. How a human. The words could have been mockery, but they weren't. They were something else, something that might have been longing or regret, hidden beneath centuries of practiced control. Before Darius could respond, Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled in his helmet comm. Captain, we've got a problem. Long-range sensors are picking up another vampire force inbound ETA 20 minutes. Configuration matches the rogue elements from this morning's attack. Sir, they're heading straight for us. Darius's jaw tightened. He looked at Seraphine and saw that she'd received similar information, probably from her own scouts. Her expression had gone cold and sharp. Betrayed by my own house, she said softly. They knew I would come here. They knew I would meet with you. And they saw an opportunity to eliminate the moderate voice that stands in the way of their total war. We need to evacuate the civilians from the medical camp, Darius said immediately, his mind already running tactical scenarios. If you leave now with your guard. If I leave, those zealots will slaughter your wounded and then report that you attacked me first, justifying a total breakdown of the Concordat. If I stay, she looked at him directly. If I stay and stand with you, I can claim those forces are traitors to House Mordain. It gives us legal coverage. But Captain, I would be asking you to trust a vampire at your back in combat. I would be asking your soldiers to not shoot me when the bloodlust rises. That may be more than your principles can support. It was a test. They both knew it. A test of whether his words meant anything when survival was on the line. Darius held her gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then he turned to his comm, all units, new orders. We have inbound hostiles, vampire extremist faction. Lady Valcroy and her honor guard are to be treated as allied forces. Anyone who fires on our allies will answer to me personally. Prepare defensive positions. Protect the medical camp at all costs. The comm channel erupted in shocked voices, but Darius cut through them with command authority, issuing specific orders, organizing the defense. When he turned back to Seraphine, he saw something in her expression he'd never seen before, surprise and what might have been respect. Your people won't forgive this easily, she said. Probably not. But they'll be alive to be angry, and that's what matters. Seraphine's lips curved in the faintest smile. You are a strange man, Captain Thorne. I'm not certain if you're the best of humanity or simply the most foolishly idealistic. Can't I be both? For the first time in their 2 years of interactions, Seraphine laughed, a sound like crystal chimes in winter wind. Then she turned to her honor guard and began issuing orders in the old tongue, positioning them to support the human defensive lines. The battle that followed was brief and brutal. The rogue vampire forces hit the defensive perimeter like a crimson wave, fast and vicious and utterly without mercy. They came in the old style. No technology, no modern weapons, just raw supernatural speed and strength augmented by centuries of predatory evolution. They were a reminder of why humanity had nearly lost the war in the early years, before the powered armor, before the plasma weaponry, before humans learned to fight monsters with science and desperation. Darius commanded from the center position, his armor's tactical display painting the battlefield in harsh geometric overlays. Enemy positions marked in red, friendly forces in blue, civilians in green, all of it shifting and flowing like a deadly dance. He fired controlled bursts from his arm-mounted plasma caster, each shot calculated to disable rather than destroy when possible. Old habits. Even in the chaos, he tried to leave room for surrender. Beside him, Seraphine fought with a terrible beauty that was hard to watch. She moved like water, like shadow, like some fundamental force that human engineering could only crudely imitate. Her personal weapon was a blade forged from some dark metal that seemed to drink light, and when she struck, enemies fell in silence, too shocked to scream. But Darius noticed something crucial. She aimed for limbs, for disabling strikes, mirroring his own restraint even when her own kind attacked her. Your left flank is weak, she called out, ducking under a wild strike from one of the zealots. They're trying to flank around to the medical tents. Darius relayed orders, shifting 3 of his heavy weapons teams to cover the gap. The battle was going better than it should have. The combination of human firepower and vampire close combat expertise created a defensive synergy that the attacking force hadn't anticipated. They'd expected to overrun a divided enemy. Instead, they faced a unified front. The Zealot commander, a massive vampire in ancient armor that predated firearms, broke through the line with raw strength, heading straight for Seraphine. His challenge was primal, a roar in the old tongue that Darius didn't need to understand. This was about dominance, about punishing the traitor who stood with prey. Seraphine met him head-on, and their clash sent shockwaves through the air. They moved too fast for unaugmented eyes to follow, but Darius's armor tracked the combat, showing him something that made his chest tight with sudden, unexpected concern. She was good, exceptional even, but the zealot was older, stronger, and fighting without restraint. He was trying to kill her. She was trying to subdue him. Principle against survival. Just like Darius himself. The zealot's blade found an opening, slicing through Seraphine's armor at the shoulder, drawing black blood that steamed in the cool air. She staggered, and the zealot pressed his advantage, going for a killing strike. Darius didn't think. He simply moved. His armor's boost jets fired, propelling him across the intervening space in a burst of speed that redlined every safety system. He intercepted the zealot's strike with his own armored forearm, the impact sending feedback pain screaming through his neural interface. Then he fired his plasma caster point blank into the zealot's knee, a crippling shot that sent the ancient vampire crashing down. Yield, Darius commanded, his voice amplified by the armor's external speakers. You've lost. Yield and you'll be treated fairly under the protocols. The zealot spat black blood and lunged anyway, forcing Darius to put him down with a shot to the center mass that finally overwhelmed even vampire resilience. The body hit the ground and didn't rise. Around them the battle was ending. The rogue forces, leaderless and facing impossible odds, began to retreat. Some surrendered, throwing down weapons with the bitter fury of zealots forced to compromise. Others melted into the darkness, fleeing to regroup and plot revenge. Darius stood in the sudden quiet, his armor's warning systems blaring about overtaxed servos and heat damage. He turned to Seraphine, who stood holding her wounded shoulder, black blood seeping between pale fingers. "You saved my life," she said, and her voice carried genuine shock. "You put yourself between a vampire noble and his rightful challenge. Do you understand what that means politically? The scandal alone could. I understand that someone was trying to kill my ally and I stopped them." Darius deactivated his helmet, letting it retract so she could see his face. "That's all that matters." Seraphine stared at him, those crimson eyes searching his features as if trying to solve an equation that didn't balance. "What? We are enemies, Captain. Not today perhaps, but tomorrow when new orders come from my court or your command, we will be on opposite sides again. I have killed humans. I will likely kill more before this war ends. So why extend this kindness? Because you chose to stand with me today. Because you fought to protect civilians of my kind when your own people attacked. Because you could have let that flank collapse and blamed it on the chaos, but you didn't." He met her gaze steadily. "Because you keep trying to be better than your worst impulses, even when it costs you." Sound familiar? For a long moment, Seraphine simply looked at him. Then something in her expression cracked. Just a hairline fracture in the perfect mask of control, but real nonetheless. "I have lived for 347 years, she said quietly. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have loved and lost, conquered and been conquered, held power and been powerless. And in all that time, Captain, I have never met anyone quite like you. Is that good or bad? I'm not certain yet." The cleanup took hours. Casualties were lower than they should have been. 17 human dead, 5 vampire honor guard wounded, 23 of the zealot force killed or captured. Seraphine's presence legitimized the captives as prisoners of war rather than unlawful combatants, which meant they'd be treated by the Concordat standards. It also meant a mountain of political complications that Darius would have to navigate. But that was tomorrow's problem. As dawn approached, that dangerous time for vampires when even the pre-sunrise light caused discomfort, Seraphine prepared to depart with her remaining guards. She'd had her shoulder wound treated by her own medic, the flesh already knitting closed with supernatural speed. She stood by her transport, looking back at the human encampment where exhausted soldiers worked alongside vampire prisoners to tend the wounded and honor the dead. Darius approached for the formal farewell, acutely aware of the eyes watching from both sides. Every interaction now would be scrutinized, weaponized, turned into propaganda by those who wanted this war to continue forever. "I've sent a full report to the Eternal Court," Seraphine said formally. "The rogue elements will be disavowed. House Mordain will pay reparations for the civilian deaths. It's not enough, but it's what I can offer. It's more than most would give. Thank you, Lady Valcroy." "Seraphine." The word came quietly. "When we're alone you may call me Seraphine. You've earned that right." Something warm flickered in Darius's chest, unexpected and dangerous. "Then when we're alone I'm Darius." She smiled, faint but real. "Darius." The way she said his name, with that ancient accent shaping the syllables, made it sound like something from a poem or prayer. "I should tell you something. Lord Victor has been formally recalled to the Eternal Court. There are questions about his loyalty, about whether he's been funneling resources to the zealot factions. The marriage alliance is under review. What does that mean for you? It means I may soon be free of a political chain that's bound me for 2 decades. It also means I'll have enemies in the court who see me as responsible for Victor's disgrace." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "There's going to be a summit in 3 months. The Eternal Court and the Human Coalition Command, meeting to discuss whether the Concordat can be salvaged or if we're heading toward total war. I'm to be one of the vampire representatives. I heard rumors. My superiors haven't confirmed who's going from the human side. Push for yourself to be included." Seraphine's intensity surprised him. "You understand what's at stake. You understand that there's more than one way to fight this war. We need voices like yours in that room, Darius. On both sides. He nodded slowly. I'll try. No promises, but I'll try. That's all any of us can do. She turned to leave, then stopped, looking back over her shoulder. The rising sun was beginning to paint the horizon in shades of amber and rose, light that would soon drive her into darkness. Darius? Today, standing with you against my own kind. It was the first time in a very long time that I felt like I was fighting for something rather than just fighting. Thank you for that. Before he could respond, she was gone, moving with supernatural speed into the shielded transport. The convoy lifted silently and glided away, disappearing into the retreating shadows. Lieutenant Chin approached, her expression unreadable. Sir, there's already chatter on the command network. Questions about your judgment. Some of the other captains are calling for a review. Let them. We saved lives today, human and vampire. If that's controversial, then maybe we need the controversy. You know they're going to make you pay for this. Probably. Darius watched the last transport vanish into the distance. But some things are worth the cost. What he didn't say, what he barely admitted to himself, was that somewhere in the chaos of the battle, in the moment of fighting beside Seraphine instead of against her, something had shifted in his understanding of the war. The enemy had stopped being a monolithic other and become individuals with choices and doubts and principles. And that was far more dangerous than any weapon. 3 months could feel like 3 years in wartime. Darius spent the weeks following the Battle of Crimson Vale navigating a minefield of military politics more treacherous than any actual battlefield. The review board convened twice, questioning his decision to ally with vampire forces, dissecting every tactical choice, looking for evidence of compromise or corruption. The purge brigades openly called for his court-martial. Propaganda networks ran endless loops of commentary asking whether Captain Thorne had been turned, in some metaphorical if not literal sense. But there were other voices too. Civilian advocacy groups praised his protection of non-combatants. Soldiers who'd served under him testified to his tactical brilliance and moral backbone. And most critically, the battle's outcome spoke for itself. Minimal casualties in a situation that should have been a massacre, diplomatic gains with a major vampire house, and intelligence on the internal conflicts within the enemy power structure. In the end, Command made a pragmatic decision. They couldn't afford to lose him, but they couldn't fully trust him either. So they did what institutions always did with problematic assets. They promoted him sideways. Captain Darius Thorne became Special Envoy Darius Thorne, assigned to the Coalition Diplomatic Corps with the rank of Commander. It came with a better office, more paperwork, and a seat at the upcoming summit. It also came with the implicit understanding that he was being watched very carefully. He accepted it all without complaint, because it meant he'd be in that room. The summit was held in Geneva, in the old UN complex that had somehow survived the early years of the war. The choice of location was deliberate, a reminder of the last time humanity had come together to establish rules for conflict, protocols for the treatment of prisoners, agreements that war could be waged with some measure of restraint. The Geneva Conventions had been written in the shadow of humanity's most terrible war against itself. The Geneva Concordat, drafted 70 years later, had tried to do the same for humanity's war against vampires. Now they were gathered to see if the Concordat could survive, or if the future held only annihilation. Darius arrived 2 days early, using the time to read briefings and study the other participants. The human delegation was exactly what he expected. A mix of military hardliners, political pragmatists, and a few genuine peace advocates who commanded more idealism than influence. The vampire delegation was more opaque, their internal politics as complex as any human bureaucracy but far more ancient in their grudges and alliances. And then there was Seraphine. She arrived on the evening before the summit's first session, her convoy slipping into the secured compound as the sun set. Darius watched from a distance, noting the security measures, the formal protocols, the careful theater of diplomatic arrival. She wore something different from her battle armor, a gown that mixed human and vampire aesthetic traditions, black silk with silver embroidery that caught the light like starlight, both elegant and faintly threatening. Her hair was bound up in an elaborate style that exposed her pale neck, a gesture that vampire protocol experts would recognize as a sign of peaceful intent. Their eyes met across the courtyard just for a moment. She inclined her head fractionally. He returned the gesture. That was all the communication they risked. But that night, after the official receptions and carefully choreographed mingling, Darius found a handwritten note slipped under his door. The paper was expensive, textured, the kind of stationery that came from an age before mass production. The handwriting was precise and flowing, written in fountain pen ink that was just slightly darker than dried blood. Garden Terrace. Midnight. Come alone. Every security protocol he'd ever learned screamed at him not to go. It could be a trap, a setup, a way to compromise him further. But he'd already made his choice months ago on a different battlefield. He went. The garden terrace was on the building's roof, a carefully maintained space of greenery and stone that provided neutral ground away from the bugged conference rooms and monitored hallways. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of late-blooming flowers and distant rain. Moonlight filtered through sculptured trees, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to shift and breathe. Seraphine stood at the terrace's edge, looking out over the city. She'd changed from the formal gown into something simpler, dark trousers and a high-collared shirt that would have looked at home in any century of the past 300 years. Without the armor or diplomatic costumes, she looked more real somehow, more present. "You came," she said without turning. "You asked. That's not why you came." Now she turned, and her eyes caught the moonlight like polished garnets. "You came because you're curious. Because in 3 months apart, you've thought about that battle as many times as I have. You've wondered if it was an aberration or a possibility." Darius moved to stand beside her, maintaining a careful distance that was proper for diplomats but felt vast for something else. "I've thought about a lot of things. Including whether meeting you alone in the dark is going to end my career. Probably. Mine too if we're discovered. But I needed to speak with you before tomorrow's session, and the walls have ears." She was quiet for a moment, then, "The summit is going to fail, Darius." He felt the words land like a physical blow. "You can't know that." "I can. I've seen the internal communications from my court. The hardliners have the votes. They're going to demand terms that your command cannot accept. Surrender of human territory, blood tribute, the old arrangement where vampires ruled and humans served. And when your delegation refuses, as they must, the Concordat will be declared void." Her voice was level, factual, delivering apocalyptic news with the same tone one might use to discuss weather. "Total war, Darius. No rules, no restraint, no pretense of civilization. Just survival. Then why are we here? Why go through the theater? Because those who want the war need the diplomatic failure to justify it. They need to be able to say, 'We tried peace and humanity refused.' They need the moral cover, thin as it is." She turned to face him fully. "But there are those of us on both sides who are going to fight that narrative. Who are going to push for an alternative framework, even if it means breaking with our official delegations. A third position. You're talking about going rogue. I'm talking about survival that doesn't require someone's extinction. There are more like us, Darius. More who are tired of this war, who see it as a mutual suicide pact playing out in slow motion. We've been building quiet alliances, unofficial channels, networks of communication that exist outside the official hierarchies. That's treason. On both sides. Yes." She said it simply, without hesitation. "It's treason against war machines that are driving both our peoples toward annihilation. It's treason against traditions that demand we hate each other because we're different. It's treason against the idea that this conflict can only end when one of us is dead." She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the unnatural cold that radiated from vampire flesh. "The question is whether you have the courage to commit that treason with me." Darius looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the supernatural beauty to the person beneath. She was afraid, he realized. Despite 3 centuries of existence, despite her power and position, she was genuinely afraid that he would say no, that he would choose loyalty to the system over the harder loyalty to principle. "Tell me what you need," he said. The relief in her expression was subtle but unmistakable. "Tomorrow, during the second negotiating session, there's going to be a procedural vote on whether to discuss territorial concessions. The human delegation will vote no, the vampire delegation yes, and that will be the official breakdown point. But if even one person from each side votes contrary to their delegation's position, it breaks the narrative. It shows divided consensus, internal conflict. It buys time. You want me to vote yes on vampire territorial demands. I want you to vote yes on discussing them, which is different. And I'll vote no on requiring them, which contradicts my own court's position. She held his gaze. It won't stop the summit from failing, Darius, but it will muddy the propaganda. It will make it harder for either side to claim the moral high ground. It creates space for the third position to grow. They'll crucify me. Literally in the case of the purge brigades. I know. And my own people will call for my execution as a traitor to vampire superiority. We'll both become pariahs to our own kind. She was close enough now that he could see the fine details of her face, the inhuman perfection of her skin, the ancient sadness in her eyes. But we'll be alive. And we'll have each other's backs as we did at Crimson Vale. It was insane. It was career suicide. It would make him a target for extremists on both sides, destroy any remaining credibility he had with command, possibly lead to formal charges of treason. It was also the right thing to do. All right, Darius said. I'm in. Seraphine's smile was like sunrise, beautiful and impossible and worth any cost to see. Thank you. She hesitated, something flickering across her expression that might have been vulnerability. I need you to understand something. This isn't manipulation. I'm not using you for political advantage. I could do this alone, take the fall myself, but it wouldn't mean the same. We need partnership. Humans and vampires standing together, showing that it's possible. I know. I understand. Do you? She reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and placed one cold hand against his chest, over his heart. Through his shirt he could feel the unnatural chill of her touch, but also something else, a seeking, a connection. Your heart beats so fast. I can feel it, the rush of blood, the heat of life. Do you know what that's like for me? I'm a predator, Darius. Every instinct I have says that heartbeat is prey, is sustenance, is something to be taken. And yet here I stand, choosing not to hear it that way. Choosing to hear it as music instead of dinner bell. Is it difficult? He didn't pull away from her touch. Every moment. But difficulty doesn't mean impossibility. That's what we're trying to prove, isn't it? That we can be more than our natures dictate. They stood like that for a heartbeat longer, then Seraphine withdrew her hand and stepped back, the professional distance returning. You should go. We've already risked too much time. Tomorrow, remember, second session, territorial discussion vote. After that, events will move quickly. I'll be ready. Darius. She called as he turned to leave. After this is over, after we've set this particular fire and watched our bridges burn, I'd like to sit down with you again. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere without politics or war or the weight of our people's expectations. Just two people who've made terrible choices together, seeing if they can find something worth the cost. He smiled, surprised by how much the idea appealed to him. I'd like that too. He left the terrace feeling like he'd crossed a threshold from which there was no return. But he'd crossed it willingly, eyes open, and that made all the difference. The summit's second day began with the kind of artificial civility that could only exist in a room full of people preparing to destroy each other diplomatically. The conference chamber was a masterpiece of neutral design. No symbols or colors that favored one side over the other, perfect temperature and lighting to accommodate both human comfort and vampire preference, security so tight that the air itself felt pressurized. 20 delegates sat around an oval table, 10 humans on one side, 10 vampires on the other, with mediators from the remaining neutral nations at the head and foot. Darius sat 3 seats from the end of the human delegation, positioned carefully to be senior enough to matter but not so prominent as to lead. Across from him, Seraphine occupied a similar position in the vampire delegation, her expression a mask of diplomatic neutrality. They hadn't made eye contact since entering the room. Professional. Proper. Exactly what observers would expect. The morning session had been brutal. The vampire delegation, led by Lord Constantine Draven, a hardliner who made Victor look moderate, laid out terms that were designed to be rejected. Return of all territory taken in the past decade. Reparations paid in resources and blood. Formal acknowledgement of vampire superiority in the world order. The humans had responded with equally impossible counter-demands. Dissolution of the vampire houses, integration into human-led governance, surrender of all supernatural advantages through some vague equalization protocol. It was theater. both sides performing for their constituencies, establishing the record that would justify the war to come. Now, as the afternoon session began, they reached the procedural vote that Seraphine had mentioned. A simple matter of process: should the territorial concessions be discussed in detail, or dismissed out of hand? The human head delegate called for a show of hands. The humans would vote no. The vampires would vote yes. The motion would fail along perfect factional lines, and that would be that. One more step toward inevitable breakdown. Darius felt his heart hammering as the count began. Humans first, as was protocol. Delegate Kowalski? No. Delegate Park? No. Down the line, each human voting as expected, each rejection another brick in the wall they were building. Then it came to Darius. Commander Thorne? He could feel the attention of the room focus on him like a physical weight. He'd been flagged as potentially problematic, but surely he wouldn't actually break ranks. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Yes. The silence that followed was profound. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet, heard the minute shift of fabric as people turned to stare at him in disbelief. Commander Thorne, the human head delegate said, his voice carefully controlled, would you care to clarify your vote? No clarification needed, sir. I vote yes to discussing territorial arrangements. Not accepting the demands as presented, but discussing them. We can't negotiate if we refuse to speak. That is not the delegation's position. I'm aware, sir. But I was assigned to this summit because of my field experience and judgment. I'm exercising both. The head delegate's expression promised future consequences, but he couldn't challenge the vote openly without making the division even more dramatic. The count continued through the remaining human delegates, all voting no as expected. Then the vampire side began. They voted yes down the line, each one a carefully modulated assertion of dominance, until they reached Seraphine. Lady Valcroy? She sat perfectly still for a moment, every eye on her, the weight of her court's expectations crushing down. Then she spoke, clear and firm. No. The vampire side of the table erupted in hissing whispers, the supernatural equivalent of shocked gasps. Lord Draven looked like he wanted to reach across the table and tear her throat out. Lady Valcroy, he said, his voice dripping with venom, you cannot possibly. I vote no, she repeated. The terms as presented are designed to humiliate, not negotiate. They're poison dressed as policy, meant to fail so that we can claim diplomatic high ground while pursuing total war. I refuse to participate in that theater. You forget yourself, Draven said, half rising from his seat. You forget your place, your duty to the court. I forget nothing. Seraphine's eyes blazed crimson, and her voice carried centuries of accumulated authority. I remember every treaty we've broken, every concordat provision we've violated, every civilian target we've struck. I remember that we're supposed to be the immortal ones, the wise ones, the beings with perspective that transcends human short-sightedness. And yet here we sit, demanding subjugation because we can't imagine coexistence. I vote no because someone must. The room descended into chaos. Both delegations talking over each other, mediators trying to restore order, security tensing in case the verbal conflict became physical. Through it all, Darius caught Seraphine's eye across the table. She gave him the tiniest nod. They'd done it. They'd broken the narrative. The summit continued for another 2 days, but the outcome was inevitable. The territorial discussion motion failed on a split vote. 7 humans no, 3 yes including Darius, 7 vampires yes, 3 no including Seraphine. The fracture lines were exposed. Both sides withdrew to caucus, to strategize, to figure out how to deal with the traitors in their midst. On the summit's final evening, as delegations prepared to depart with nothing accomplished officially, Darius was summoned to meet with the senior human command. He went expecting court-martial proceedings. What he got was worse: disappointed pragmatism. Commander Thorne, General Hawthorne began, her weathered face showing every one of her 60 years, you put us in an impossible position. We can't discipline you too harshly without making you a martyr. We can't ignore what you did without looking weak. So here's what's going to happen. She slid a data pad across the table. Darius picked it up, scanning the orders displayed there. You're being reassigned to Border Station 17, Hawthorne continued. It's a quiet posting, minimal action, basically administrative duty. You'll maintain your rank, but you'll be out of any position to influence policy. You'll keep your mouth shut, serve out your time, and maybe in a few years when this has blown over, we can rehabilitate your career. She leaned forward. Or you can refuse the posting, resign your commission, and take your chances as a civilian in a war zone. Your choice. It was exile, genteel and bureaucratic, but exile nonetheless. Being shelved. Put somewhere he couldn't cause trouble, couldn't continue to advocate for compromise. When do I leave? He asked. 72 hours. Use the time to settle your affairs. He accepted the orders and departed, feeling the weight of every eye on him as he walked through the command center. Traitor. Sympathizer. The words followed him like shadows. But he'd expected this. He'd known the cost. What he hadn't expected was the message waiting in his quarters. Another handwritten note, delivered by some means that bypassed all security. They're sending me home to stand trial for treason. The court will make an example. I have perhaps a week before the summons arrives. Meet me one last time. You know where. Darius stood holding the note, feeling pieces of his carefully constructed world crumble. He'd known there would be consequences for Seraphine too, but he'd hoped her status, her bloodline, would provide some protection. Apparently not. The hardliners wanted blood. He burned the note in his room's small sink, watching the paper blacken and curl, and made his decision. He found her in the garden terrace again, in the same spot where they'd stood 3 nights ago. But this time there was no moonlight, just the gray overcast of a coming storm. She stood at the edge, looking out over the city, and she didn't turn when he approached. They're going to execute me, she said quietly. The trial is a formality. Lord Draven and his faction have the votes. They'll call it necessary discipline, a message to others who might harbor sympathy for humans. She laughed, bitter and soft. 347 years of existence, and I'm going to die for the crime of voting no in a meeting. Don't go back. Darius said it before he'd fully thought it through, but once the words were out, he meant them completely. Refuse the summons. Seek asylum with the human coalition. And become what? A defector? A propaganda tool? The vampire who saw the light and switched sides. She finally turned to look at him. That's what they'd make me, Darius. Both our peoples would use me as a symbol, proof that their side is right. I'd never just be myself again. Then we run. Both of us. There are neutral zones, territories where neither side has full control. We could. Could what? I'd. Live as fugitives, waiting for the day when assassins from both sides find us. She shook her head. I won't do that to you. I won't let you throw away your life for what? He stepped closer, close enough to feel that supernatural cold radiating from her. For the first person I've met in this entire war who actually gives a damn about doing the right thing? For someone who stands by her principles even when it costs everything? Seraphine, you can't go back to face a rigged trial. I won't let you. You can't stop me. You're being exiled to some border station and I'm going home to die. That's the cost of what we did. We knew it when we cast those votes. The cost was supposed to be our careers, not your life. I'm a vampire, Darius. A creature of war and blood and centuries of predation. Perhaps this is fitting. Perhaps this is the universe balancing accounts. Don't. The word came out harder than he intended. Don't make yourself into a martyr. Don't pretend that your life matters less because of what you are. You're the bravest person I've met, human or vampire. You deserve better than a show trial and an executioner. Seraphine looked at him for a long moment, and in her ancient eyes, he saw something break. The last wall crumbling, the final pretense falling away. What do you want from me, Darius? What would you have me do? I want you to live. I want you to choose survival, even if it's messy and complicated and politically inconvenient. I want. He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Say it, she whispered. I want time with you. Real time, not stolen moments in gardens while empires collapse around us. I want to learn who you are when you're not being a war bride or a diplomat or a symbol. I want the chance to see if this thing between us is real or just trauma bonding in a war zone. It's real, she said simply. I knew it was real the moment you stepped between me and that zealot's blade. I knew it when you voted yes in a room full of people who wanted to crucify you for it. I knew it when you came here tonight instead of preparing for your exile. She reached up, placing one cold palm against his cheek. I've had lovers, Darius. In 3 centuries there have been many. But I've never had someone who saw past the monster to the person. Who treated my choices as meaningful rather than aberrant. You gave me that gift. Then don't waste it by walking into an execution. Come with me. The words spilled out before she could stop them. Not to my court, that would be death for you too. But to one of the underground networks I mentioned. There are communities of deserters, both human and vampire, people who've opted out of the war. They survive in the margins in places both sides have written off. It's not glory or honor or redemption. It's just survival. But it's survival together. It was insane. It was desertion. It meant abandoning his oath, his duty, everything he'd built his identity around. Border Station 17 was exile, but at least it was still service. What she was proposing was something else entirely. How long do we have to decide? He asked. Hours. I leave tomorrow morning. If I don't board the official transport, they'll know I've run. They'll send hunters. And if I don't show up at Border Station 17? Same thing. Different hunters. Darius looked out over the city at the lights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there the war continued. Soldiers were dying. Civilians were fleeing. The machinery of mutual destruction ground onward, indifferent to any individual's choices. But standing here with Seraphine's cold hand still against his face, he felt something else, possibility. The chance to choose a different path. Not the path of glory or duty or sacrifice, but the simple, difficult path of trying to build something new from the ruins. I need to do something first, he said. Tomorrow morning before you leave. Meet me at the old cathedral on the eastern edge of the city. The one that was damaged in the early fighting but never demolished. Why there? Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to throw away everything for a chance at something better, I want to do it right. I want a witness, even if it's just old stones and broken glass. I want a moment where we choose each other with full knowledge of what we're choosing. Seraphine's smile was sad and beautiful. A wedding in ruins. How appropriate for us. Not a wedding. A promise. A covenant between 2 people who decided that some things matter more than empires. All right, she said. Tomorrow morning. The old cathedral. If you're not there by dawn, I'll assume you've chosen duty. I'll be there. They stood together in the growing dark, 2 people on the edge of a precipice, holding on to each other as the storm finally broke and rain began to fall. The old cathedral had been beautiful once. Darius could see evidence of its former glory in the surviving stonework, Gothic arches that still soared despite missing pieces, remnants of stained glass that caught the pre-dawn light in fractured rainbows, carved saints whose faces had been worn smooth by time and violence. It had been caught in the crossfire during one of the early battles for Geneva, back when both sides still fought over cities instead of simply destroying them. Now it stood as a testament to loss, kept standing more by momentum than structure, too damaged to restore but too sacred to fully demolish. Perfect for what he intended. Darius had arrived an hour before dawn, using the darkness and his knowledge of security gaps to slip out of the compound undetected. He'd brought nothing but the clothes on his back and something he'd carried since the beginning of the war. A small data chip containing records he'd been keeping, documentation of everything he'd witnessed, every compromise and atrocity in moment of grace. His insurance policy, his confession, his testimony to history. He sat on a fallen pillar, watching the sky lighten, wondering if she would come. Wondering if, in the clear light of morning and the face of practical consequences, she would choose survival over sentiment. Then he heard footsteps, soft but deliberately audible. She emerged from the shadows like a piece of the night, reluctantly releasing her, still wearing the dark clothes from yesterday but with something added. A pack slung over one shoulder, traveling gear that signaled her decision. "You're here," she said, and there was relief in her voice. "So are you." They moved toward each other, meeting in the nave beneath the broken ceiling where rain and light fell together through missing roof sections. Seraphine set down her pack and looked around at the ruins. "Do you know what this place was?" she asked. "I knew the priest who founded it centuries ago. Father Marcus. He believed that sacred ground could be created anywhere people gathered in genuine spirit, that holiness wasn't about architecture but intention." She smiled faintly. He would have approved of this. Two heretics making vows in a broken church, choosing love over law. Is that what this is? Darius asked. Love? Seraphine met his eyes. I don't know. How could I? We've shared 2 conversations and 1 battle. We're strangers in every way that matters. But I know it's the beginning of something that could become love, given time. And I know I want that time enough to risk everything. Then let's make it official. Darius reached into his jacket and pulled out the data chip. This contains 7 years of records. Evidence of war crimes on both sides, testimony about commanders who violated the Concordat, proof of corruption and atrocity, and all the ugly truths both our peoples don't want to face. I was going to release it someday when the timing was right to force accountability. He held it out to her. I'm giving it to you. Not as leverage or insurance but as trust. The most dangerous thing I possess placed in your hands. My testimony that I believe in you, in us, in the possibility that we can be better than the world we're leaving behind. Seraphine took the chip with careful reverence, then reached into her own pack and withdrew something wrapped in dark cloth. She unwrapped it to reveal a blade, not a weapon, but a ceremonial knife that looked ancient beyond measure, the handle inlaid with symbols that predated human writing. This was given to me when I was turned, she said quietly. It's the only thing I own that's truly mine, not the property of my house or my position. It's made from the fang of the vampire who sired me, who died in a war 3 centuries ago. It's supposed to be passed on to my own progeny if I ever create one. She held it out to him. I'm giving it to you. My only inheritance, my only link to the vampire I was before politics and war. My testimony that I believe in you, in us, in choosing to create something new rather than perpetuating what was. They stood holding each other's treasures, 2 people exchanging the most valuable things they possessed. Trust and history and the keys to mutual destruction, if either chose to use them that way. Then we're bound, Darius said. By choice, by witness of these stones, by the exchange of what matters most. Not because law or custom or our people say we should be, but because we decided we want to face whatever comes next together. Together, Seraphine agreed. They sealed it with a kiss, the first real touch that wasn't about battlefield pragmatism or diplomatic performance. Her lips were cool, impossibly soft, and she tasted like wine in winter and something older than names. When they parted, the sun was beginning to truly rise, light streaming through the broken roof and beams that looked almost solid. We should go, Darius said. The hunters won't be far behind once they realize we've both vanished. I know someone, Seraphine said, shouldering her pack. One of the underground network coordinators. She runs an extraction operation for deserters, both human and vampire. If we can reach her safe house before noon, she can get us out of the continent entirely. They moved through the city's abandoned sections, staying off main streets, using routes that Darius knew from security briefings and Seraphine knew from centuries of walking these paths in their various incarnations. The city was waking up around them, oblivious to the 2 fugitives passing through its spaces. They almost made it. The ambush came in an old subway station, one of the underground passages that connected different parts of the city. Darius had just stepped onto the platform when he heard the distinctive whine of powered armor activating. 6 human soldiers emerged from concealment, weapons trained, armor marked with the insignia of the Purge Brigades. Commander Thorne, the lead soldier said, his voice amplified by his helmet speakers. Stand away from the vampire. We're taking you into protective custody. I'm not under threat, Darius said calmly, positioning himself slightly in front of Seraphine. Stand down, soldier. I'm not going with you. Sir, you've been compromised. Turned or charmed, or whatever unnatural influence she's. I'm not compromised. I've made a choice. There's a difference. We have orders to retrieve you. If the vampire resists, we're authorized to neutralize her. Behind him, Darius felt Seraphine tense, readying for combat. 6 soldiers in full armor with weapons charged and the element of surprise. They'd both likely die in this subway, their grand gesture ending in blood and shadows before it truly began. Unless he gave them what they actually wanted. You want me to prove I'm not under her influence? Darius asked. Fine. I'll come with you. But she goes free unharmed. That's the deal. Darius, no, Seraphine began. Sir, we're not authorized to negotiate with. Then shoot us both now and explain to command why you killed an officer who was trying to cooperate. Darius's voice carried command authority, the tone that made soldiers obey even when they didn't want to. Or take the win. You get me, you bring me in, you look like heroes. She disappears into whatever hole the vampires crawl into. Everyone gets something. The soldiers exchanged glances, their helmet communications creating a soft static buzz. Then the leader nodded. She leaves first. Then you come with us. Darius, I won't leave you. Yes, you will. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the plan, saw what he was actually doing. You'll go. You'll survive. You'll carry what we started to whatever comes next. That's the deal. Seraphine understood then. He was creating distance, giving her a head start, buying time with his own capture. It was stupid and noble and exactly the kind of thing that had made her choose him in the first place. I'll come for you, she said quietly. Wherever they take you, however long it takes. I'll come for you. I know. She ran then, moving with supernatural speed that no human could match, disappearing into the tunnel darkness before the soldiers could react. They started to pursue, but Darius stepped forward, hands raised in surrender. You got your win. I'm yours. Let's go. They put him in restraints, not the regular kind but the powered suppression cuffs designed for enhanced individuals. They hurt, sending neural static through his system that made thinking difficult. They marched him back to the surface into a waiting transport, and as the vehicle lifted off, Darius caught one last glimpse of the old cathedral through the window. Then they covered his head with a hood, and the world went dark. The detention facility was exactly what he'd expected. Sterile, secure, designed more for isolation than interrogation. They put him in a cell that was too bright, too white, monitored by cameras from every angle. They took his clothes and gave him a gray jumpsuit. They ran medical scans looking for any sign of vampire influence. Bite marks, blood contamination, chemical alterations. When all the tests came back negative, they seemed almost disappointed. For 3 days, no one spoke to him except through the automated delivery systems that provided food and water. Total isolation, designed to break down mental resistance, to make human contact seem like a reward worth cooperating for. On the 4th day, General Hawthorne came. She sat across from him in the interview room, her face unreadable, and for a long moment said nothing. Then, we know she got away. The vampire, Lady Valcroix. Our people lost her in the tunnels, and by the time we had aerial search assets in position, she was gone. Probably halfway across the continent by now. Good, Darius said. Good? Hawthorne's eyebrow rose. You're relieved that an enemy operative escaped? That's what you're going with. She's not an enemy. She's a person who wants this war to end without complete mutual annihilation. That makes her the opposite of an enemy. It makes her a vampire with an agenda we don't control. Hawthorne leaned forward. You're an intelligent man, Thorne. Too intelligent to fall for honeyed words and a pretty face. So explain to me what I'm missing. Explain why an officer with your record threw away his career, deserted his post, and ran off with a creature that has likely killed hundreds of your fellow humans. Because fighting isn't the same as winning, Darius said quietly. Because this war has been going on for 7 decades, and we're no closer to victory than when it started. Because both sides keep escalating, keep matching atrocity for atrocity, and where does it end? When does it stop being about survival and become about extinction? When do we look at ourselves and realize we've become the monsters we're fighting? So your solution is to abandon your post and shack up with the enemy? My solution is to demonstrate that another path exists. That humans and vampires can cooperate, can trust each other, can build something that isn't predicated on someone's destruction. He met her eyes. You brought me to that summit because you thought I had perspective worth hearing? Well, here it is. We're losing, General. Not militarily, the battlefield is essentially stalemated. But we're losing ourselves. Every compromise of principle, every civilian target, every time we do something because they did it first, we lose another piece of what makes us human. And if we win a war by becoming monsters, what exactly have we won? Hawthorne was quiet for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the door, paused. You're going to face a court-martial, she said. Desertion in wartime carries serious charges. But I'll make sure your testimony is part of the record. All of it, the summit, the votes, what you were trying to accomplish. It won't save you, but maybe someday someone will read it and understand. That's all I can ask. She left. The isolation resumed. Days blended together. Darius exercised in his cell, meditated, thought about everything that had led him to this point. He didn't regret his choices. Even facing imprisonment or execution, he didn't regret giving Seraphine time to escape, didn't regret the covenant they'd made in a broken cathedral. He only regretted that they'd had so little time. 37 days after his capture, something changed. The facility's alarm system began blaring, not the regular lockdown warning, but the emergency breach alert that meant someone had gotten through the outer defenses. Darius stood in his cell, listening to the distant sounds of combat, trying to parse what was happening from acoustic cues alone. Then his cell door simply opened. The electromagnetic lock disengaged with a soft click, and the door swung inward. Seraphine stood in the corridor beyond, wearing matte black tactical gear that looked human-made, carrying weapons that definitely weren't. Behind her were 4 other figures, 2 human, 2 vampire, all armed, all moving with coordinated precision. "Sorry I'm late," she said, and she was smiling. Rescuing someone from a black site detention facility takes planning. Darius felt something break open in his chest, hope and relief and a joy so fierce it hurt. "You came. I told you I would." She stepped into the cell, reaching for his hand. "Come on. We have about 4 minutes before their response teams lock down this sector. Our exit window is narrow." He took her hand, warm human flesh meeting cold vampire skin, and let her pull him into motion. They ran through corridors that were full of smoke and flashing emergency lights, past cells holding other prisoners who watched their escape with varying expressions of hope and envy. The rescue team moved like professionals, each covering angles, communicating in efficient shorthand. They reached the exterior wall where someone had blown a hole large enough for a vehicle. A transport waited, sleek, unmarked, definitely not military standard. They piled in, and the vehicle rocketed away from the facility as security forces tried to rally a pursuit. "They'll come after us," Darius said, still trying to catch his breath. "Let them try." The human woman driving looked back with a grin. "We've got safe houses in 17 countries, underground networks that have been moving deserters for years. You're not the first to choose a different path, Commander. You're just the most visible." As the facility disappeared behind them, Seraphine pulled Darius close, and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling the reality of survival sink in. "Where do we go now?" he asked. "Somewhere we can be useful. The underground isn't just running away, we're building something. Refugee networks that evacuate civilians from both sides. Medical stations that treat humans and vampires without asking politics. Communication channels that let the moderates coordinate across enemy lines." She pulled back to look at him. "It's messy and dangerous and probably doomed to fail. But it's better than sitting in a cell or dying on a battlefield for someone else's war." "Together?" he asked. "Together," she confirmed. 6 months later, in a safe house deep in neutral territory, Darius stood before a mirror examining the gear laid out on the table. Not armor anymore. He'd left that behind in Geneva, along with his rank and commission and all the official trappings of his old life. This was different. Lighter. More practical. The clothes of someone who worked in shadows instead of spotlights. Seraphine entered, carrying supplies from their latest mission. Medical equipment rescued from a destroyed clinic, destined for one of the underground's treatment centers. She set the boxes down and came to stand beside him. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "Never. Just reflecting." He turned to face her. "A year ago, if someone told me I'd be here, fugitive from both sides, working with an underground network in a relationship with a vampire, I'd have thought they were insane. And now I think maybe insanity is just another word for seeing clearly." He pulled her close, and after 6 months, the cold of her skin no longer startled him. It was just part of who she was. "We're making a difference, Seraphine. Slowly, one rescued civilian at a time, one diplomatic backchannel at a time. It's not ending the war, but it's saving lives. And costing us ours possibly every time we operate." But she smiled. "Though I find I'm less afraid of that than I used to be. Hard to fear death when you've found something worth living for." They stood together in the quiet safe house, 2 people who'd chosen each other over empires, holding on to the hope that their small acts of resistance might add up to something larger. Outside, the war continued. But inside this space they'd carved out, there was peace. And that, perhaps, was its own form of victory. The mission was supposed to be simple. Infiltrate a vampire house compound that was being used as a staging ground for raids against human settlements. Not to attack. Never to attack. The underground network had strict protocols. They were rescuers and mediators, not combatants. The goal was to reach the compound's human captives, people being held as blood sources or bargaining chips, and extract them through a service tunnel that Seraphine's intelligence indicated was poorly guarded. Simple. Surgical. Low risk by the standards of their increasingly dangerous operations. Darius should have known better than to trust simple. They were 12 on this mission. 6 human, 6 vampire, all members of the underground who'd proven their commitment to the cause. Darius led the human contingent, Seraphine the vampire. They developed an efficient partnership over the past 18 months, learning each other's combat styles, building trust through dozens of operations. They moved through the abandoned industrial sector that surrounded the compound like twin shadows, perfectly coordinated. The first indication something was wrong came when they reached the service tunnel entrance. The poorly guarded access point had been reinforced with modern security systems. Biometric locks, motion sensors, automated defense turrets. This wasn't here 3 weeks ago, Seraphine murmured, studying the security array with a trained eye. Someone upgraded the defenses. Upgraded or knew we were coming? Darius asked quietly. They locked eyes, both thinking the same thing. Leak. Someone in the network had been compromised, or worse, was actively betraying them. We should abort, one of the human operatives said. If they know. The explosion cut off his words. A shaped charge detonated on the far side of the compound, creating a diversion. But not their diversion. They hadn't brought explosives. It's a trap, Seraphine said, but they were already moving, combat instincts overriding tactical analysis. Because if this was a trap for them, the captives inside were bait, and bait in a trap often ended up dead whether the trap worked or not. They breached through a secondary entrance, fighting their way past security that was present but oddly positioned, not to keep intruders out, but to funnel them deeper into the compound. Darius felt the tactical wrongness of it like an itch between his shoulder blades, but the screams coming from the detention level pulled them forward. They found the captives in a central holding area, 23 humans, malnourished and terrified, chained to walls in a room that looked like it belonged in a nightmare. But standing among them, waiting with the patience of someone who'd set the board perfectly, was Lord Victor Thrain, Seraphine's estranged husband. The vampire noble whose political disgrace had been set in motion by her votes at the Geneva summit. The hardliner who'd lost power and position because of her cooperation with humans. "Hello, wife," Victor said, and his smile was pure malice. "I've been waiting for you." He was tall, over 6 feet, and built like a warrior from an era when physical prowess determined survival. His armor was ancient, predating firearms by centuries, etched with kill marks that numbered in the thousands. His eyes burned with crimson fury, and when he moved, it was with the controlled grace of a master predator. "The marriage was annulled," Seraphine said coldly. "You have no claim on me. Annulled by the court that you helped humiliate me before. But I don't recognize their authority anymore. I've gone independent, gathered those who remember the old ways. And I've decided that before I kill you for your betrayal, I'm going to make you watch while I destroy everything you've built." He gestured, and more figures emerged from the shadows, vampire zealots, at least 30 of them, surrounding the room. "The underground network," Victor continued conversationally. "Your little project of mercy. Very touching. Very naive. Do you know how easy it was to track? How simple to plant informants? I've known about your operations for months. I let you continue because each rescue gave me more intelligence, more patterns to analyze. And now I know the location of every safe house, every coordinator, every deserter who's joined your cause." Darius felt his blood run cold. "You're going to hit them all at once. Very good, human. Yes. While you're trapped here, my forces are moving on 17 locations simultaneously. By dawn, your precious network will be nothing but corpses and cautionary tales." Victor's attention shifted to Darius, and his expression twisted with contempt. "And you? The human who corrupted my wife. Who made her believe that coexistence was possible. You're the reason she's become this weak, pitiful thing that mistakes mercy for strength. She's stronger than you've ever been, Darius said. Because she had the courage to change. You're just doing what's easy, what every vampire has done for centuries. She's building something new. She's built you a funeral. Victor moved impossibly fast, and suddenly his hand was around Darius's throat, lifting him off the ground. The grip was crushing, cutting off air, and Darius felt his vision start to darken. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to watch me kill these captives one by one. Then you're going to watch me dismantle your little human-vampire partnership by forcing your people to kill hers in self-defense. And when you've seen everything you care about destroyed, then I'll kill you. Slowly. While Seraphine watches and remembers what happens when vampires forget their place. Victor, stop. Seraphine's voice cracked with genuine fear. Your quarrel is with me. Let them go. I'll submit to whatever judgment you want, but let them go. No, I don't think I will. But feel free to try stopping me. He squeezed harder, and Darius felt something in his throat start to give way. Show me this great strength you've supposedly found in mercy. What happened next unfolded in a handful of seconds but would echo for much longer. Seraphine moved, drawing the ceremonial blade she still carried, the fang knife she'd given Darius, which he'd given back with the understanding that weapons should stay with those who knew how to use them. She was fast, trained, deadly. But Victor was older, stronger, and he'd been expecting her attack. He caught her strike with one hand while still holding Darius with the other, and the blade, ancient and supposedly unbreakable, shattered against Victor's armored palm. Seraphine staggered back, shocked, and Victor laughed. Even your tokens of rebellion are fragile. Just like. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. One of the human operatives, Sarah, a former soldier who deserted rather than participate in civilian massacres, had drawn her plasma pistol and fired center mass at Victor. The shot took him in the shoulder, burning through ancient armor, and he dropped Darius in pure surprise. The room erupted. The underground team engaged the zealots, and the compound became a killing ground. Darius scrambled for a weapon, his throat bruised but functional, and found himself fighting back-to-back with Seraphine as they tried to reach the captives. We need to get them out, he shouted over the chaos. The tunnel's still locked. We need time to. Then we buy time. Darius made a decision, the kind that had defined his career and his exile both. Everyone. Fighting retreat to the tunnel entrance. Protect the civilians. They moved as a unit, the underground team forming a protective wedge around the captives, fighting toward the one exit that wasn't cut off. Darius saw Sarah go down, her armor breached by a zealot's blade. Saw Marcus, a vampire who defected after refusing to participate in blood raids, take 3 strikes meant for a human teammate before he fell. The cost was mounting. But they were moving. They were saving who they could. Victor pursued rage overriding tactics, focused on Seraphine with an obsession that was personal beyond strategy. He crashed through his own people to reach her, and when they clashed again, it was clear he was toying with her, letting her think she had chances, then crushing them. You were supposed to be my perfect trophy. Victor snarled, catching her wrist and twisting until bones cracked. Beautiful, skilled, politically connected. You were supposed to make me untouchable. Instead, you destroyed me. I wasn't your trophy. Seraphine gasped through the pain. I was never yours. Then you're nothing. He threw her like a broken doll, and she crashed into a support pillar hard enough to crack the concrete. Darius saw her fall, saw the way she struggled to rise and couldn't, and felt something primal override training. He ran at Victor. No weapon, no armor, just human fury and desperate love. It was stupid, suicidal, exactly the kind of emotional reaction that got soldiers killed. Victor caught him almost lazily, one hand fisting in Darius's shirt. Persistent. I'll give you that. He drew Darius close, and his voice dropped to a whisper meant only for him. Did you really think you could keep her? Did you really think a human could offer her anything real? You were a novelty, a pet, a phase. She's 300 years old. You're what, 30? 35? You'll be dead before she notices, and she'll move on to the next interesting distraction. You're wrong, Darius managed, even with his throat closing again. What we have is temporary. Like all human things. Like you. Darius felt his consciousness fading, the world narrowing to a tunnel of darkness with Victor's burning eyes at the center. This was how it ended. Not in glory but in a trap, dying for a rescue that had failed, losing everything in a handful of moments. Then Seraphine's voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding and carrying a tone Darius had never heard from her before. Victor. You want me? Then face me. Alone. Traditional challenge. Or are you too afraid to honor the old laws? Victor paused and despite himself he turned. Because that phrase, traditional challenge, meant something in vampire culture. It meant single combat, unjudged by law or convention, where the winner took everything and the loser lost their very existence. It was ancient, primal, the way vampire disputes had been settled before civilization taught them politics. You're wounded, Victor said, but there was interest in his voice. You can barely stand. Then it should be easy for you. Unless you need your zealots to help. Seraphine pulled herself upright, every movement obviously painful. One-on-one Victor. Winner decides what happens to everyone here. Loser accepts oblivion. It was insane. She was injured, weakened, facing a vampire who outclassed her in every physical metric. But Darius understood what she was doing, buying time for the rest to escape, making Victor's pride do what his tactics wouldn't. Victor considered then smiled. Traditional challenge. Accepted. He dropped Darius, dismissing him as irrelevant. Everyone stops. This is now between my wife and me. The fighting paused, both sides recognizing the cultural weight of the challenge. The underground team used the reprieve to get the last of the captives to the tunnel, working frantically on the locks. But all eyes were on the two vampires circling each other in the center of the room. They clashed with blinding speed, and even to Darius's trained eye, the fight was hard to follow. Seraphine was skilled, 3 centuries of accumulated experience, technique refined across eras, knowledge of every combat form humanity and vampire kind had developed. But Victor was brutal strength and vicious experience, fighting with the absolute confidence of someone who'd survived countless challenges. The fight went badly from the start. Victor landed strikes that would have killed a human instantly, crushing blows that shattered ribs, slashes that opened deep wounds, attacks that drove Seraphine back step by agonizing step. She adapted, shifted, tried to use speed and technique to compensate for the strength differential. But the math was inexorable. She was losing. Darius watched in helpless fury, understanding that the protocols of traditional challenge meant he couldn't interfere. To do so would dishonor her, void the agreement, restart the fight with everyone involved. But watching her die was equally impossible. The end came when Victor caught Seraphine's ankle mid-kick, twisted, and slammed her into the ground hard enough to crater the floor. She tried to rise and couldn't, her body finally refusing to respond. Victor stood over her, victorious and contemptuous. Weak, he said. All that potential wasted on mercy and human sentiment. You could have been magnificent. Instead, you're just disappointing. He raised his hand for the killing strike, claws extending, and Darius felt time slow to crystalline clarity. He could see what was about to happen. Could see the end of everything they'd built, everyone they'd saved, the hope they'd represented. He could see the old vampire codes that said challenges were sacred, interference forbidden. He could also see the underground team's weapons raised and ready, waiting for his order. Could see Seraphine looking at him with eyes that said save yourself, save the others, let me go. Could see the choice in absolute clarity, honor the challenge and lose her, or break the rules and save her but lose any legitimacy the underground had built. Some things were more important than legitimacy. Now, Darius shouted. The underground team fired simultaneously, plasma bolts and conventional rounds, a coordinated strike from 12 angles at once. Victor, focused on Seraphine, didn't dodge in time. The barrage caught him center mass, overwhelming even ancient vampire resilience, and he went down. The zealots roared in fury, the sacred challenge violated, and the fight resumed with redoubled intensity. But the underground team was already moving, grabbing Seraphine, pulling back to where the tunnel was finally blessedly open. They fled into the darkness, carrying their wounded, leaving carnage behind. Victor's enraged screams followed them, promising vengeance, promising that this violation would be repaid 1,000-fold. They emerged into the pre-dawn air 3 blocks away, through a tunnel exit that deposited them in an abandoned warehouse district. The team scattered to pre-planned extraction points, taking the rescued captives to safe houses. Darius found himself in a stolen medical transport with Seraphine and 3 others, racing toward one of their emergency clinics. Seraphine lay on the stretcher, her body already working to heal the catastrophic damage, but the process was slow and obviously agonizing. Her hand found Darius's and her grip was weak but insistent. You broke the challenge," she whispered. "You dishonored it. I saved you. They'll never accept the underground now. Humans, interfering in vampires' sacred rights. You've made us outlaws, to both sides. We were already outlaws. At least now we're alive outlaws." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not sorry, Seraphine. I won't lose you to anyone's laws, not vampire, not human, not the universe's. So if that makes me dishonorable, fine. I'll be dishonorable." She managed the faintest smile. "Stubborn. You knew that when you rescued me." The clinic was one of their better facilities, actually staffed by real doctors, supplied beyond basic first aid, capable of handling both human and vampire trauma. They had Seraphine in a treatment bay within minutes, stabilizing her, helping her body's natural healing along with transfusions of stored blood and medical intervention. Darius stood outside the bay watching through the observation window when one of the coordinators, Elena, a former human intelligence officer, approached with a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, her expression grim. The tablet showed news feeds from multiple sources, both human and vampire. All of them covering the same story, the massacre at Redstone Compound. 23 humans massacred by vampire extremists. Underground terrorist cell caught in the attack. Heroic security forces held off the terrorists. Sole surviving vampire, Lord Victor Thrain, providing testimony about the underground's crimes. It was all lies, but it was being broadcast everywhere, shaping the narrative before the truth had any chance to spread. "He's flipping it," Darius said numbly. "Making us the aggressors. Making the captives look like casualties of our attack rather than his hostages. And he's got evidence to back it up," Elena confirmed. "Footage from the compound's security systems, edited to remove context. Chemical analysis of our weapons. Testimony from witnesses, who swear we were trying to free prisoners but caused a firefight that killed them." She paused. "The kicker? He's using your violation of the traditional challenge as proof that humans can't be trusted to honor vampire law. Both sides are eating it up." Darius felt the walls closing in. Every mission they'd run, every life they'd saved, every argument they'd made for coexistence. All of it undermined by one night's disaster. The underground network was collapsing under the weight of Victor's propaganda offensive. Safe houses being raided by both human and vampire forces who suddenly saw them as mutual enemies. And it was his fault. His choice to save Seraphine over the mission's integrity. He'd make the same choice again in an instant. But that didn't make the consequences any less catastrophic.